All right, well, let's take a look at the homework that you did last night, and that was the handout with a pentagon on it, and you were supposed to construct a similar pentagon that should have turned out just a little bit larger. So your pentagon would have looked something, but only something like this perhaps, plus or minus-ish. Very similar to the one that we did in class in our last lesson. And then you had another line segment that was the base of what was going to become a similar and slightly larger pentagon. I believe it was labeled A, B, C, D, E. If not, you could have labeled that yourself. And labeled this line A prime, B prime, for instance. What's the first thing we needed to do if we wanted to make a similar pentagon? Kendall?
You do the diagonals. When you draw the diagonals from like one vertex.
Which vertex?
The base.
One of the base vertices. Which one for you?
A.
A, okay. Could have been A or B, really didn't matter. But from A, there are two diagonals. You should have drawn both of them. The one from A to D and the one from A to C. Now, for my part, I like to number these angles. Obviously, there are 3 of them. What do we do next? Genesis?
You take your compass and put it on the vertex A, and you draw an arc from all the way from AB all the way to AE.
Good, from AB all the way to AE. Let me shrink it just a little bit so it fits on AE there. Good, so a big arc that goes through all 3 of the angles. Then, Ethan, while I've got the compass open that certain amount,
you put it on point A, at the end of the line.
A prime.
Make a big prime.
Gonna make a nice big sweeping arc. Because we're going to copy all 3 of the angles. How did I recommend, thank you, sir, how did I recommend we go about measuring and marking off these angles, Jamie?
Do one first, then, or we'll measure one first.
Good, so measure across the arc for 1, mark that off.
And then open it to include 2.
Good, 1 and 2 together. Instead of just 2, we're going to do 1 and 2 together.
And measure that off. And then open it to include 3.
Good, 1, 2, and 3 all together. So that would be the entire base angle now. Right in between. There we go. All right. And of course, to finish copying the angles, go ahead and connect the dots. But when we connect the dots here, Chris, do you remember from our last lesson, I recommended when you draw these lines, draw them, Audrey?
Extra long.
Very long, good, very long. So that way, when you're trying to get the lines to connect later, you don't have to go through and re-extend them, because mathematicians are lazy. We don't want to have to go back and extend. Plus, frankly, sometimes lining up the straight edge is a challenge. So,
Good point.
keeping it as few steps as possible, as little extra work as possible. All right, so once we've got these, we could go ahead and number these 1, 2, and 3 if we wanted to. Audrey, once we've copied all 3 of the angles here, now what? Copy the other base angle. So since Kendall started at A, we're going to go to B now. We're just going to copy that 1 angle. So again, a lot of copying angles, a lot of construction 3. And I think when I taught construction 3 so long ago, I said this is a construction you're going to use a lot later on. And this particular construction is one I thought of. But even anytime we've done parallels, right, we've had to use lots of equal angles. Again, when you connect the dots, this doesn't have to be super long, just long enough to hit the diagonal. Because this point where side and diagonal meet is this vertex here, which we can call class C prime. All right, once we've done that, Quentin.
Copy the angle of C.
Good. Now, you could technically copy the whole angle at C if you wanted to. I generally will copy as little as possible, so I'm just going to go on top of this line here and just copy that angle specifically. Arc, arc, measure across, measure across. And again, when you connect the dots, it needs to hit this diagonal that we drew already. And that point here, class, could be called D prime. And then finally, to finish it out, Kendall. Good, copy the angle at D again. It could be the whole angle or just this little piece. Now, if this is really small for you, you might actually be better off making the whole thing. Like this angle's pretty big. This one's pretty small. So maybe for you, it would be advantageous to do the whole angle at D and just kind of really bank on this line being correct. It's not so small for me that I'm gonna have too much trouble copying the angle. Again, you have that option, which is nice. And again, connect it on over. And there's my E prime. There's my construction. I've got a similar pentagon. Checked most of yours, maybe a little bit off. What you should be able to see as you look at it, and I noticed what Genesis did, she took her highlighter and she went and highlighted the rim here. In fact, if you did that on both pentagons, you kind of see them side by side and say, hey, do these look the same? I mean, other than one's bigger, one's smaller, do they actually look the same? So it's not a bad strategy to use there. Questions on this construction? How many feel like pretty much nailed it? I think I got all the steps in there. All right, any questions at all? Jamie, you did not raise your hand. Is there a step you're like, I know what I did, I messed this up, or what have you? Give me some feedback.
So for the, on the right side, how do we get the angle there for C?
Over here?
Yes.
Well, again, you could either measure all of angle C, or what I did was, since I already had this diagonal, I just measured above angle C.
And what was the step right before that?
Well, the step before that was copying angle B to get this line here.
Okay.
So then, because I have this line, in fact, let me use yellow chalk to kind of highlight it. I have this line now, because I've already finished the angle at B, and of course I've got this line here. So that's why I could build off of either line. So you're either going to copy the angle off of this line going all the way up to this side, or you're going to build off this line and take that angle. But you have to copy one of the two. And again, I could have copied the whole angle C, because I do know this line. I could have come down here and copied the whole angle, measured all the way across this angle, and then measured all the way across that angle. That would have gotten me this third, I guess technically third side as I put it on around. Good question. Good. Any other questions on this? All right, if you would, maybe on the back side of the handout, or maybe on a separate sheet of, actually probably better on a separate sheet of paper, go and draw 3 line segments of varying lengths. Let's, for consistency's sake, let's make our longest segment our first one. And let's call this segment G. Then go with a shorter segment, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of half the length. Call it C. And then let's go ahead and make a segment somewhere in between the first two. And let's call it S. We're very spirited with this set of constructions here. So we've got our line segments G, C, and S. Nice. What I'd like you to do on your paper is construct the fourth proportional to G, C, and S. Construct the fourth proportional to G, C, and S on your paper. That looks good. Good. You feel like you have it now, Chris? I know you indicated earlier you felt like you didn't quite get it. You feel like you understand it now?
There's a bunch of mistakes that I did before, because it was hard to see the board on the video, so I do better not hearing, just looking.
I will say this, that was part of this feedback Mr. Scott gave me, was that trying to project onto the screen, it's just not the same for audio or visual, whereas if you're looking at it on a computer screen, it actually looks great and you can hear it great. But he mentioned when you try to project the video lesson, it didn't turn out so well. So yeah, if you need to go back and re-watch, you certainly have that option, but it will definitely show up better on a computer screen than it does on a projector.
I mean, I guess we could turn off the lights to make it look better, but then we wouldn't have been able to work that well.
Set your seats, constructing the fourth proportional to G, C, and S. Remember, for a fourth proportional, or by the way, a third proportional. Because remember, a third proportional means that fourth spot. Anytime you're trying to construct a fourth spot, start with the two sides of the triangle. Jamie's finished. Jamie, then what?
Then you'll measure off G
All right, so
from the vertex.
maybe shouldn't have made G quite so long, but whatever. All right, so we got measure G.
Measure from the vertex line to the line.
And technically, you do it either side, but for consistency's sake, I like to mark it off on the first side, the left-hand side. So there's G. All right.
And then we do the same thing with C, but put it in succession.
Good. So not from the vertex, but you said in succession. So from the end of G, and it just fit. Good. So what I was concerned about with is G being as long as it was. Okay.
Then we do S from the vertex.
Good. So so measure S and mark that off from the vertex here.
No, on the other side.
Oh, on the other side. Okay. All right. You've got to remember, I'm still not feeling well, so my brain's not working too good. Thank you, Jamie. All right. Okay, I was seeing if you were paying attention. All right. For a change, it actually is true. All right. And I'm giving Jamie a hard time because, you know, I'm back now, so I can. All right, then what, Jamie?
we draw a line from the point on the left to the point on the right.
Good, from the end of G to the end of S. Or we said the end of the first and third segments get joined with a straight line. All right.
Then we copy the angle at G.
At the end of G, so copy this angle here. And of course, want to make sure the compass will fit on the segment C. All right.
And then we measure the arc.
Good. So part of copying the angle, of course, is make the arcs, but then also measure across, which I hadn't yet done. And then we connect the dots. We'll just go all the way across. How many had a construction like this?
You go from first to the second one?
From the bottom of the first to the bottom of the third, straight across. And then have this. How many raise of hands have this construction?
I did the completely wrong construction.
Did the completely wrong one. Does it make sense what you should have
this one
done?
is, yeah.
Okay, that's dividing a line proportionally to 3 segments, which we're actually going to do here in just a moment.
Oh, man.
So if you would, on your paper, go ahead and draw a 4-inch line. I want you to divide a 4-inch line proportionally to G, C, and S. We're going to divide a 4-inch line proportionally to G, C, and S now. If you don't have a ruler, just make a line that looks like it'd be about 4 inches long.
Oh, with the line we already have.
Yes, with the same G, C, and S we already have.
Yeah, nice.
So if you're on a separate sheet of paper, keep the first paper out and available so you can reuse G, C, and S. When you're dividing a line proportionally, start by making another line that comes off at an angle. It's going to be tight. Just by that much. Okay. Just by that much. talking about his game winner. Twisted by that.
He's at the bottom of the backboard.
At least I hit the backboard.
That's true.
I don't think there's any more glory in that than an air ball, to be honest. You know?
Well,
Except nobody really chants backboard, backboard, right? Or even brick. You know, if you air ball, then you're gonna hear it. They're like air ball.
Unless you're like Tim Duncan, and then they want you to hit backboard.
Alright, so there's G, C, and S. Mark the spots there. So you can draw your long line, mark off your 3 given segments, the G, C, and the S, connect the end of the last segment, and then copy a bunch of angles, right? So
what was that?
I'm just musically inclined is all.
Do you actually play instruments?
I do.
Nice.
The microphone.
He plays the role of director.
And we can call these G prime, C prime, and S prime, I suppose, if we wanted to. Proportional to G, C, and S, though not equal to them. How many had a construction like this? Good to go on this construction. All right, now if you would, construct the mean proportional to G and C. Construct the mean proportional to G and C.
Come back to this.
Construct the mean proportional to G and C.
I don't think I remember how to do it.
Seeing some people flipping back in their notes real quick. Maybe this picture will trigger a thought. This is the picture upon which the construction is based. Now we're going to start by drawing the long line that will serve as this long line along the base of the triangle. And since G and C are the 2 segments for which we're constructing the mean proportional, we'll mark off G and C. And perhaps scribble off the excess. Would it be wrong to do C and then G, class? No. Mean proportion, remember, it doesn't matter the order in which the quantities are taken.
I did the wrong construction again.
Well, do the correct one now. I don't have a whole lot of excess to scribble out. Ethan, what would we do next? After we've drawn the long line, we've marked off G, we've marked off C, now what?
Put point of compass on the side thing to make it perpendicular. The little arcs, you would open your compass.
What am I doing now? Get my compass, okay.
And put it on the point in the middle, like where the arc is.
Between G and C, right between G and C, okay?
And make arcs that are smaller than, so that bit smaller than that, like little in the middle, and
Okay.
make arcs on both sides.
Okay.
And then make the perpendicular bisector.
Perpendicular bisector?
Open chapter more, and then make arcs. No. Put the would you? Yeah, it would go there. Yeah, and then put it there and make arcs, and then make the perpendicular bisector.
Well, it's not necessarily bisector per se, the perpendicular, right?
Perpendicular.
We want this line right here to be drawn next.
So
Okay,
you just,
so
I have a question. You just
yes.
take anywhere in between G and C?
no, you pick the point between G and C. G ends right here. C begins right there. This is the separator between G and C.
I know, I'm just thinking.
Okay, this is G.
Okay, yeah, I got it, never mind.
This is C.
Yeah, yeah.
And the point that separates the two of them is the point at which we will construct our perpendicular. And that's really all I was looking for you to say, Ethan, was construct the perpendicular between the segments. So we've got this perpendicular. Now we know that we could put a semicircle around a right triangle. I don't have a right triangle to put a semicircle around. But if I had the semicircle, I could put a right triangle inside it. How do I go about getting the semicircle? Audrey? We start by finding the midpoint of what? The whole line, like all of this? Just G and C, just the two segments in particular. So not the part that was scribbled out, but the rest of it, right? You need to find the midpoint. And how do I find a midpoint? Okay, so I'm going to kind of look down here instead of the whole thing there, and this is about half, a little bit more than half, I think. So we're constructing the. Now we're constructing the perpendicular bisector. There we go. And I give you a recommendation. When you construct the perpendicular bisector, class, draw it either really lightly or draw it dotted in some way that you don't think this is where the mean proportional is going to be. This line is only used to get the midpoint. I don't care anything else about this line. Real lightly here. That point is my midpoint. And the only reason I even need the midpoint was, why again, Genesis? To make the semicircle, good. So go to the midpoint, and now we can make the semicircle. And technically you're done, right? As soon as you've got the semicircle, you know that from the point of intersection down, this is now the altitude. If you were to draw the lines here, this is the altitude, and segment is to altitude is to segment. I've got my mean proportional. How many have this construction? In fact, technically, you don't even need the whole semicircle. You could just measure off the half and mark right there. Technically, though it looks cooler with the semicircle. It also looks kind of cool if you do go ahead and draw these lines down here, but you don't have to draw those lines. Questions on this construction?
Okay, so at the semicircle, mine went from the end of G to the end of C.
Yeah, that's what it should do. See how it went from the beginning of G to the end of C.
Mine went from the end of G to the end of C.
Oh, you put a semicircle right here?
I really need to label better. Like, see where your G is right there?
Yeah.
Mine went from there to C.
From right here?
Yeah.
From like the middle of it?
Mine. This right here, so I measured G and marked it off right here. This is where it went.
Okay, so this is G.
And then I went from here in succession to right here. This is.
Oh, see, that's the problem, because this is where the perpendicular should have been. If this was the end of G, this is where your perpendicular should have been.
So I shouldn't have done it in succession?
And then from here you mark off C. So this is C, so this is where your perpendicular should have been. Then you find your midpoint, you put a semicircle all across there. Clear desks, set for a sheet of paper, pencil, straight edge, compass, bucket for your tears. Actually, keep that next to your desk. I don't want it on your desk. It takes up too much room.
34.
Sheet of paper, pencil, compass,
Okay,
straight edge.
Is it on your copy or our copy?
It's going to be on my copy. Now, the paper is in case you're working on a construction, you're like, oh no, this is not going well at all. You will have the opportunity to put a big X over it and say on paper, and then you can do it on paper and start over. So that's to give you that opportunity. That's why you need some paper out. And this is quiz 37. The homework will be listed in the description of the video. So if you're watching on YouTube, find that homework in the description. Students, I will give you the homework after we complete the quiz, but this will conclude the video for today. On the top of your quiz, if you would put your first and last name. There's not necessarily a blank that says name, but there is space for your name at the very top, along with today's date, first and last name, and today's date, which is 4/23/21. Notice you're given 3 lines, A, B, and C. Given A, B, and C, go ahead and follow directions for each of these constructions. You may begin.